Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to FreeThought Hour, my interview show. Now, I have a fantastic guest today. He was raised in Oxford of an academic family. He worked in the pharmaceutical and medical equipment industry, including a period working with the NHS on pandemic planning. He co-founded and was the editor of the UK consumer magazine Healthcare, called Medicine Magazine, which launched in 2007. Since then, he's moved to Japan and has an amazing list, as long as your arm, of interests. It includes evolutionary biology and psychology, artificial intelligence, the metaverse, longevity, space exploration, transhumanism, and aliens. We're going to have a fantastic conversation. Welcome, Chris Bartlett.
Hi. How you doing?
How the devil are you, Chris?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. That was very impressive. Yeah.
Well, I owe it to you as you sent me the intro.
Yeah. Although I didn't necessarily expect you to read all of the points, but I guess the important point there is that I have a very broad range of interests, and yes. I guess the thing that sort of binds them together is that I sort of my whole life I've been pursuing understanding kind of the truth about the world and the way it really is, the true nature of it. So even since I was very young, I read voraciously. Like when I was at school, I kind of read the entire library in a couple of years, and they had to kind of ship books in for me. And
yes,
it goes on. I mean, I still kind of read 2 or 3 books a week these days, often like as audiobooks or something like that. Yes. A lot of podcasts recently as well. Those have become a fantastic resource. But yeah, I mean, basically I want to know what happened in the past, what's happening now, like what's truly happening now, and most importantly of all, I want to understand what's going to happen in the future. I think these days there are a lot of experts on sort of specific areas, but I'm trying to be a little bit of a modern day polymath, and I think there's a benefit to doing that, because you can try and put everything together and see what the overall kind of trajectory of the world is going to be, and maybe not enough people are doing that in the age of specializing. So
you're on a trend there, which I think is happening. It started out with expertise diversifying into specialist areas, but I think they're coming back together now, because people are realizing that in order to discover new information, you really need to have a pretty full grasp of all the interacting areas, especially when you discover, after being, I'm a retired science teacher, and after being sort of fairly focused on science for most of my life, I discover that philosophy has a big impact into it, and I've been exploring that to broaden my education. And of course, being an ex-teacher, I'm like you. I'm keen to continue to learn. You can't be a teacher without being a learner too.
No, agreed. Yeah, not a good teacher anyway.
Indeed. Yeah. So you mentioned your youth and how you consumed all the books at your school. Can you fill us out a bit on that? Tell us a bit more about your early years.
Yeah. I mean, I was the oldest child in the family, and I kind of have some memory of like very young childhood, kind of idyllic walks with my mother in sort of spring sunshine and things like that. And I guess my father's also was a high school science teacher, and my mother's like an Oxford educated theologian. So there was quite a contrast between my two parents there. Although at that age, there wasn't a lot of like indoctrination or anything like that. I always asked a lot of questions when I was a kid and wanted to know everything. And, luckily, I got a lot of answers from my parents. But, as I kind of, as I got older, I got taken to church. I think, my mother's like, I hope I get this right. I think a Methodist, or at least, member of a free church. So, this wasn't like full-blown Catholic indoctrination or some other sort of evangelistic situation. If I talk to my mother about the concept of God and stuff, she has a very kind of, how can I say, like esoteric, or maybe that's the wrong word. But she'll talk about things like describing heaven. She would say heaven is being close to God, and hell is being not close to God. Obviously she wasn't talking to me like this when I was a little kid, but later I sort of questioned her. But we did go to local church sometimes, and I would go to sort of things like Sunday school and other sort of things, and I obviously the teachers in the Sunday school had a far less nuanced approach to it. And at the same time, I started primary school in a Church of England school. Was it Church? I think Church of England. So
me too. That's what happened. But at that time, it was pretty much de rigueur. All of the primary schools went, or many of the primary schools went under the C of E banner.
Yeah, I mean, maybe 60% or 40%, something like that, right? And I mean, even those that didn't had to have sort of daily worships or things like that,
which had to be of a broadly Christian nature too. That was the regulation at the time. I'm pleased that you weren't raised in a fundamentalist family, though. It's much more tolerant to be raised in an era in a family of more moderate religious people.
Yeah, I mean, my father's not religious, or certainly wasn't then. So there was a bit of a conflict, there. My father never went to church when I was a kid, so so there was already a obvious dichotomy between those two. But I mean, when I went to primary school, suddenly I was in an environment where they were kind of trying to indoctrinate a bit. So I was the kid in the class who, when they said prayers at the end of the day, just refused point blank. Even as soon as I arrived at the school, all the kids were putting their hands together, closing their eyes, saying prayers, and I was just point blank refusing. I remember it very clearly. It seemed to me ridiculous and unjustified and just strange, and I just point blank refused to do it. And to their credit, that I don't remember teachers ever pushing me that hard on it. It was really the other children who thought I was misbehaving and tried to get me into trouble. Yeah. It's weird that at 5 I was doing that, and I was very well behaved at school. Like, I mean, I did not make trouble, but on this point, I refused to comply. And same in morning assembly in front of the head teacher. And I mean, that kind of rolled forward for years. And I mean, I've always been very antagonistic, or at least I was when I was younger, to religion. And at high school, I refused to go eventually to chapel services and things like that. It was a traditional.
From the age of 5, that's quite willful for one so young, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it, it is strange. I think it must be genetic, because my youngest child is very like me, and I could believe if he was in that environment, he might do the same. But it is strange. I think it probably preceded going to primary school. I think I was difficult in church. The stories just didn't add up to me almost immediately.
So I don't want to spend a great deal of time prying into your personal personal life, but you are in Japan. How did that happen?
Wow. Basically, I went to Oxford Brookes University. It was a very international university 20 years ago, and like more than half the students I was friends with were not from the UK. So, and they'd all lived abroad or were living abroad, and I'd really only been outside the country a couple of times. So I really wanted to experience living in a foreign country. And working in a foreign country, and Japan seemed like a good option because it was easy to get a job, well paid, safe. I'm not really the kind of person who wants to sort of backpack around, dangerous countries, roughing it.
Yes.
All power to people that do, but it's not really my style. Yeah.
You wanted a bit of comfort, but you wanted something as alien as possible, and that is Japan, really, isn't it?
Oh, in some ways, but it's a mixture. It's a mixture. I mean, it's certainly more alien than Europe, right? I mean, Europe is really the language is the main difference, and maybe food and a bit of the culture, but there's a big overlap. But I mean, modern Japan is very westernized, and I mean, my wife, for example, who's Japanese, she grew up on half the same TV shows and music that I grew up on. So even though there's a language barrier, there's not a huge cultural barrier. And I mean, Japan is, just for example, Japan's the one of the least religious countries alongside the UK. So in that sense, it's closer to the UK than many European or America countries or America. Yeah.
Absolutely. So enough of yourself. You've kindly prepared us a slideshow. Would you like to go into that now?
Maybe not straight away. Let me just check my notes.
Okay. Reality.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's have a look at the slides then. So here the question, I'm always asking, and always have been since I was a very young child, is, what's true and what's not. Like it became very clear to me early on that not everything adults were telling me was true. As soon as you start reading books, you have independent access to education, right? And when books contradict each other, then something's up, right? Because two things can't both be true. So I've been trying to carry that through, and I think it's a really crucial question at the moment, like what's true and what's not.
Yes, I was engaged in a Facebook debate only yesterday or the day before on this very subject. What is true? So I have opinions about it too, but let's hear yours first. Shall I screen the slides?
Yeah.
You ready for them?
Yeah. Okay. Next. So this is just a metaphor coming up here. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a metaphor for how a lot of people view their understanding of the world, and particularly how people view, science and how science works. So, I think a lot of people feel like, with science, you have kind of an existing view, which is more or less true, right? And that to a large extent, you can sort of see where you don't know what's true, and areas that you do have understanding. And then, if you keep moving forward a few slides, then as science moves forward, understanding becomes more detailed, pretty much across the board, and you're heading for the actual truth in full detail. That picture there is the most accurate map of the world that we have to date, but you could keep going and zooming in theory.
That's accurate according to the Mercator projection.
I think this map's been generated by measuring extremely carefully the Earth's surface. But as you say, it's a 2D picture, so that's definitely a projection. But anyway, the reality of science is more like something like these slides. So let's go to the next slide. So this is actually, I don't have the date for this. I should have made a note of the date. But this is a map of the world made way back. I get a guess, sort of Roman era. This looks like maps made by traders on the Silk Road or something like that between the Roman Empire and China. So it's not entirely unrecognizable to us, right? I mean, I think most of us can make out the Mediterranean there. Probably Britain's one of those blobs at the top left. And Africa's a bit weird here because you've got it going across, where obviously the east coast of Africa goes down. But this would be, not too bad if you're navigating by ship between ports and things. There's a lot of detail around Rome, I guess, and probably along the Silk. That's probably along the Silk Road, right, towards China. So you have a lot of detail there where you know what's happening locally and in places you've looked carefully. But as you get further out, your detail gets much less, and eventually you really don't know anything. So these people probably
here be dragons.
Right, here be dragons, and probably these people maybe didn't know anything outside of there or could speculate that much, and they certainly probably didn't know that the Earth's one tiny planet in a massive galaxy in a massive universe, etc. So this is I bring this up as a metaphor, right? So this is how knowledge works, right? Like your knowledge is the knowledge of humanity is focused in certain areas, areas which are closer to which are more important to us in our lives, and areas which can make money, are good for defense, that kind of thing,
as a relevance to us.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is still the case today. Like, take any issue that we've been looking at over the last couple of years. For example, what's the situation in Ukraine? What are the two sides thinking? How did it come about? What's going on the ground right now? What are people's motivations going forward? Is there any kind of funny business on any side going on, that kind of thing? Or take it, great example recently is the science around the pandemic, right? The truth is, and I worked on pandemic planning, what would it be now, like more than 15 years ago. So, I was working with a private company, and we were working with the NHS to plan for what we thought was a coming pandemic. At the time, we thought it would either be avian flu related or a spin-off from 2003 SARS. So, I was sorry.
Ebola, possibly.
Ebola, yeah, Ebola is definitely, always a slight worry. Although, the SARS of 2003 was extremely frightening. It was more deadly than the one we've just had, and it spread. It went all the way to Canada before it was stopped, and it's nothing short of a miracle, really, that it was stopped before it went worldwide, because it was incredibly infectious.
Yes.
And by contrast, the one we've just had, could be seen as really quite mild, despite sadly hundreds of thousands or millions of people dying and being sort of injured by the virus. But we were really worried, and we were trying to work with the NHS to prepare for it. So, stock supplies of masks and things like that. And I think, and they were a bit better prepared maybe for the swine flu pandemic that came in 2008. But my feeling is, that a lot of the preparedness was sort of run back in the run up to the one we just had. Anyway, taking it back to this, you know, the science around the virus and pandemics generally was not nearly as good as everybody hoped it, you know, or thought it should be. That's the truth. I mean, just for example, we thought for sure, or maybe not for sure, but it was sort of common wisdom that most viruses, respiratory viruses, spread by touch, and you know, touching door handles and person-to-person touch, and it really wasn't thought that airborne communication was going to be a big issue. You know, although it can happen. And at the beginning of the pandemic, people were pretty sure that it probably wasn't going through airborne, and it, you know, eventually it became clear it was. But you know, we really didn't have the science or knowledge to know exactly what to do about the pandemic, about the you know, the second SARS virus. You know, I think there was a lot of pressure on politicians and people to, you know, give an air of confidence, partly to, you know, justify measures they were taking. But, you know, really, this is what we had. You know, there were some areas we knew a lot about, and there were other areas we didn't. And we were rapidly trying to patch those holes. But there's a limit to what you can do in 2 years.
Yes. And of course, retrospectively, the politicians are now being castigated for not knowing more back then.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix. I mean, certainly when politicians say, you know, we could never have known there was going to be a pandemic, I mean, that's just not true. It was well known for decades that there was almost certainly going to be a pandemic. So, you know, they could and should have prepared a lot better than they did. And for example, they were working on vaccines for the 2003 SARS virus, and they basically just gave up eventually and just shelved it for lack of funding and stuff like that. So, you know, there's a lot they could have done. But anyway, this is the reality of science and knowing things generally. And, you know, one day we can get to a really accurate picture of things, but, you know, it takes a lot of time. It's probably going to be a never-ending process.
Yes. If science had solved all the mysteries, it would stop. There would be no need to continue to research.
It'd be a bit boring, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I think we'll never get there, whatever happens.
Yes.
But you know, we could get close.
We could. I was going to say, it's interesting how everything we discover brings up many more questions than the single answer that is just provided.
Yeah, absolutely. Like every discovery brings up, you know, 10 more questions or whatever. And I mean, also every discovery or every new technology brings benefits and threats, you know, and new problems that you then have to find new solutions for. And you know, since we started using fire, we've basically, as a species, been, you know, going down a route where there is no turning back. You know, we have to keep going forward, really. Yeah. Maybe you could go to the next slide. So this is just another world map from the past. So, you know, it's a bit different. And I'm using this as a metaphor for, you know, diversity of worldviews, maybe, but also changing paradigms, right? So
I take it that what you're doing here is showing us different models based on our knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's what science does.
That's right. Yeah. So it's all about modeling reality. And you know, there's some small details, and there are some sort of big underlying details which can affect the whole model. You know, obvious ones would be like, you know, evolution, you know, is so, you know, it's not just biological evolution, you know, evolution applies so widely. And once that explanation, you know, became widely known, it changed perception on everything. Yes. For example, if you go to the next slide. So, you know, here's another older map, but it's definitely taking on the form of the world as we know it. But what you've got here is you've got Africa and Europe on the right, and you've got Asia on the left, and obviously they knew those were connected. So at this point, they're thinking, the world is maybe a sphere, right, or a cylinder or something like that. So of course what's missing here is America,
the new world. Yes.
Yeah.
So what was the date of that? Do you know?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure, but I think it's right on the eve of the discovery of America. I think it's 14 something. I think, I could be wrong. I think that huge blob in the middle is not Atlantis, but Japan, actually. I could be wrong, but yeah, Japan was slightly better known than it might have been at that point.
Because of trading.
Yeah, I think trading. I think the Portuguese or the Dutch had already made some contact. But so with knowing that the world maybe is round, you then can start to think, well, maybe we've actually got gaps in our knowledge and that kind of thing. So Australia, of course, missing there too. But I think, one thing that I think people often forget is just how little we know, right? How many gaps there are in our knowledge.
Yes.
And there's a terrible tendency, as you saw in the first two maps, to in the absence of knowing something, to just assume that what you do know is pretty much all there is to know. And that can be really quite disastrous. The more complex something gets, the more dangerous that becomes, right?
Yes. There was a couple of guys did some research on this. What were they called? They came up with the suggestion that there's a level of ignorance which doesn't know how ignorant it is.
That's right. So is that Dunning?
Yes, Dunning-Kruger.
Dunning-Kruger. I mean, I think, basically at some point when you get smart enough, you have to start thinking, what do I not know? And more importantly, what are the unknown unknowns, right? Because if you know you don't know something, that's one thing. But if you don't know that you don't know something, that's really a problem.
Yes. That was you almost quoted the Secretary of State of the American, the Bush presidency, who came up with famously said, there are knowns, there are unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns.
I think I was channeling Yes Minister, actually. But they may have been channeling the same thing. So but it's certainly true, and something you really want to be careful of. So I think generally scientific process is still running pretty well, but I think there are some problems that maybe need to be looked at. I think there's kind of a complacency that the system works perfectly, and I think there's room for improvement. Basically, there's I think one problem is there's a lot of scientists are not fully able to challenge the kind of the accepted narrative of various things. You see this in physics, for example. We've been pretty stuck on string theory for a long time. It may turn out to be true, but it's kind of shocking how long that's been rolling.
Yes, it's looking unlikely that it will turn out to be true the further ahead we get.
I mean, certainly you'd hope that there would be more entertaining of other ideas, and I think what you have in that, and as in so many fields, is a sort of a bunch of people that have built their careers on it being right, and they'd like to retire before it's proven wrong.
Yes, they have a vested interest because of their previous discoveries. Yeah. But the strange thing here is you're sort of trapped in the mainstream view, and part of the reason is because of finance. You won't get funding if your research project is too outlandish.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, the control that academia has over academics is near total. I mean, if you're a senior academic in some field, if you really say something that's going to annoy other people in the field, you could be kind of cancelled by those people in the field. They'll speak badly about you. They'll cut you off from grants. They'll cut you out from discussions. We've seen some terrible examples of people being, having their reputations destroyed because they weren't following official narratives. And I mean, if you think about, I used to work with the NHS quite closely, and if you think about the way the NHS works, it's very, very difficult for doctors to speak out on anything. And here I'll just go with like the way the NHS is funded, for example. It's if say for example doctors think that a newer, more expensive treatment should be being used, it's quite difficult for them to speak out and say publicly that it should be used, because they're all in the system, and they can they're embedded in a hierarchy, both the sort of NHS hierarchy and an academic one and a professional one. And doctors can and have been removed from practicing for all kinds of things. I mean, at the moment, doctors are prescribing without seeing patients, but I know a doctor that was barred for doing that sort of more than 10 years ago. And he was one of the best doctors I knew. So that
was before Zoom, so of course it was easier to bar somebody because it wasn't the done thing at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard for anyone to get information out back then. And I think that kind of brings me on really. I just
wanted to mention, following what you said, that pretty much all the major breakthroughs have been made by original thinkers, haven't they? Not mainstreamers, but renegades. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I mean, it depends on exactly what kind of progress you're talking about. I mean, I think the current system is pretty good at the sort of fine detail progress, the grinding kind of progress, the steady progress, the progress that doesn't worry the people at the top, right? But I think
doesn't upset any apple carts,
right? And but paradigm changing progress, that does take the renegades, and it's really difficult. I mean, in business it takes sort of an Elon Musk to shake things up, and I mean, the progress he's made on on rockets, for example, is just extraordinary. I mean, I couldn't believe the progress that's been made when I saw a rocket land on its end. I mean, it blew my mind. Yeah.
Previously only seen in science fiction movies. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't even think I thought that was likely to happen ever, really. Coming down like that. So, and I mean, electric cars have become a real thing, in large part because of what he was able to do. And I don't. It was absolutely insane to start a car company. A sort of a legacy thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's true of other. There's lots of examples. Darwin with biological evolution. I mean, he was really going against the grain there.
Einstein too.
Einstein. I mean, even now when you hear the theory, it sounds preposterous, doesn't it? Really, until you hear sort of greater detail. But even then, I mean, it's pretty difficult stuff. But yeah, definitely, there's got to be more toleration for outside voices, and you really want more people working outside the system. And I think often systems are built to make sure that people are not working outside the system, and that's a huge problem. Very few people could speak out on a lot of the issues that we've seen recently, without coming a cropper with their sort of higher ups or the corporate press. But that brings me on to one point I wanted to make. So a couple of points actually. So one is that there's the phrase that the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed yet. And that's something that people need to understand as well, because science that comes into our living rooms, science we can buy, it's normally years behind the science being done in laboratories, and even further behind theoretical and pure science that's being worked on, right? There's this. I would argue, and I think many people argue, there's two sort of ways of progressing in science. So one is painstaking research and proving things with gold standard scientific evidence, and there's a very strong place for that, and I'm not taking anything away from that, although you do have to be extremely careful with the unknowns and the unknown with those, because science is super expensive. So there's a lot of things we could investigate that we do not, and people need to be aware of that. So absence of evidence is not evidence of absence,
indeed,
in summary. But there's also, yeah.
Can I respond to that? Because don't you think that science development has got exponentially faster recently?
Yeah, definitely.
But the problem is we have a sort of a two-speed planet now, because if you're lucky enough to live in a country which has a stable electricity supply, for example, then you can do this sort of thing. But if you don't, you can't.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's definitely true that the pace of development is accelerating, and it's probably going to do so exponentially, and inevitably some people are left behind on that. There's obviously going to be imbalance. On the other hand, the latest technology is normally expensive and buggy, and then the technology that comes up behind it is cheaper and more reliable. So some countries have managed to skip pretty much wired telephone systems, and go straight to mobile telephony. So there's a lot that you can do.
It's not always supposed to be the trailblazer.
Not always, no. But going back to about the scientific evidence, the other type of progress can come from explanations, like really good explanations. So if I go back to evolution, for example, now Darwin did produce a huge amount of evidence to back up his theory of evolution, but the explanation itself is extraordinarily powerful, and even in his case, he didn't put it out publicly, as far as I know, not widely, without the evidence, because he was so concerned about how it would be received and being wrong.
Yes,
the reaction. But he could have done, right? He could have put it out, before he did, and
he was pushed into it, wasn't he, by his rival?
By his rival, yeah. So he sat on it for a long time, and then had to go. But had it gone out earlier, it could have been tested, in thought experiments in many different areas. And I think a lot of people would have said the explanation is so good that it's clearly the best explanation around, and it could have been adopted, while waiting for the evidence to come in, and it could have been extremely useful to people. So explanations and hypothesis is an explanation that's not been proven yet, and those are very valuable. And I think we have a bit of a problem at the moment that people are being mocked for putting forward explanations that haven't yet been fully proven.
Can I interpose there, because first of all, I wanted to say that Darwin's idea is extraordinarily simple, really, isn't it? It's just a recognition that change occurs rather than stasis being predominant. And unbeknown to him, of course, going on at the same time was someone else who was providing what you might call evidence of how this happened, in the form of the monk Gregor Mendel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
finally, I just want to say that a hypothesis, I like your definition, but it's got to be testable.
Yeah, yeah. It has to be testable, falsifiable. Although although some if it's the god of the gaps. If you don't know the answer to something, you still might need a working hypothesis, right?
Well,
Even if it's not testable.
A speculation.
Yeah. You can call it a different word, but there are some subjects like why am I me and not somebody else, related to consciousness and things like that. And maybe we can answer these with science in time, but maybe some of them we can't. And but to still live as a human being and not go mad, we need a working hypothesis. So I'm not sure I would absolutely rule out the value of explanations that can't be tested, but obviously you can't really use them for purposes like politics or
No, I wouldn't rule them out, but the problem with them is they can be extremely wild guesses. So that's why we have this qualification threshold of testability.
Yeah, or wishful thinking.
Yes,
for sure. Just having a quick look at my notes. So just one other point I wanted to make before I go more into the kind of talking about the future. We are in interesting times at the moment. And some people have said maybe we're going through a second enlightenment, right? So obviously the first enlightenment was in large part brought about by the printing press and the ability to
fortunately we're able to cut that out in the editing.
Okay, no problem. So the first enlightenment brought about in large part by the printing press.
It's all about communication, isn't it?
All about communicate.
Ability to get more than one head into a committee situation.
That's right, and inconvenient truths being able to be circulated, quicker than they could be, censored, and also it also means that you don't have this problem of developments occurring and then being forgotten, and you end up having to take a step back, which was happening, all the time through the kind of Roman era and into the Middle Ages. I mean, there was progress, but because if a craftsman discovered some new technique, there was no sort of patent system. There was no way to easily sort of spread the technology around. And so, often those kind of that technology and know-how died with the person who, invented it. So there were multiple effects, but certainly information became free, right? In the first Enlightenment. So with all the kind of the craziness we're seeing in the last few years, the culture wars, and a lot of worry by people in power. I think that their power is being undermined. I mean, for example, cryptocurrencies undermining state power in finance potentially, and the internet massively undermining the power of the media. I mean, we take it for granted, but it used to be that all your news had to come through the BBC or the newspapers or something like that. And although I've been on the internet sort of now 30 years, but most people have been on the internet for just 10 or 15 years. And the ability to directly disseminate information is revolutionary. And I think we are seeing teething problems from both that and from the reaction to it by the people that previously had the power.
That's right. So you're absolutely right. The printing press was the first loosening up of communication, which enabled the freedom of speech effectively to spread. But then what we are now in, I've got a phrase here that I like, is a rapidly changing media landscape. And the freedom has gone extreme, so that anybody, can get something published on the internet, whereas previously you had to go to a publisher and persuade them that your words were worth printing, or you had to submit to an editor who would then decide whether or not he wanted to. Nowadays, all that's gone. You can just sit in front of your computer like we're doing and get something out there.
That's right. I mean, it's revolutionary. I think, there's been a bit of a pushback in recent times. I think the internet was slightly freer in the past, but I don't know if that pushback's going to succeed. I think we have to accept that it could, because to a large extent, somewhere like China, it has succeeded. So I think we need to be cautious. And there is the problem of misinformation as well. Although I think it can come from multiple sources.
More power to the fact checkers, I say.
Yeah, well, yeah. But we probably need fact checkers on our fact checkers, and fact checkers on our fact checkers. But I also think like people need to get more savvy too.
It's like the infinite regression of fleas.
Yeah, it is. It is. There's chaos at the moment, but personally, I'm more in the favor of more freedom than less freedom. And I think it can sort of thrash itself out. I think good speech can beat bad speech, and I think good explanations from scientists can beat conspiracy theories, etc., like that. So I think I'm pretty firmly on the sort of greater freedom, and I think ultimately it may be unstoppable anyway.
What we need, and I know you'll agree with this, is a greater spread out of critical thinking ability.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely what we need. I mean, I kind of despair recently, because on the one side, we've got people believing pretty crazy conspiracy theories. But on the other hand, we've got people who are not entertaining even reasonable conspiracy theories, and kind of coming in behind what they would say like is the science, in a kind of religious kind of way, right? And
so it's certain.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't the science. There's the scientific process, and questioning things is the scientific process.
We learn most when we discover that we were wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm delighted when I find out, if I find something I'm wrong about and I can change my mind on it, I'm normally delighted to fix that problem. And you'd hope other people would be too. And I think, if something is true, it can normally stand up to a lot of questioning. So, I think, anyway, as you say, I think people generally, they can't just rely on other people to do their thinking for them. They've got to start doing more of it for themselves. And I think podcasts are definitely an area where people are being helped to do that, because there's a huge difference between a 2-minute clip on the news, or a short sort of news article, and a sometimes 3-hour podcast interviewing experts or discussing topics at length. It's a huge difference in the quality and the understanding that can come out of that, if people can do it enough. If they've got the time, it certainly takes a lot of time. So I'm pretty optimistic going forward, hopefully, but a lot of people are threatened by this, because it's definitely challenging existing sort of hierarchies and things. Yeah.
And people don't like that, because certainty is much more comforting than doubt.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and we're gonna discuss in a minute the future, and what may happen in the future. But people really don't like doubts. They don't like having their assumptions challenged. They don't like worries about the future, and they will often believe anything if it's going to stop them having to face up to those problems. So, yeah, absolutely.
Next slide.
Yeah, I forgot where I am those slides now. Okay. so I had a Darwin one in there, so we can go through that one. So let's move on to the future, which is kind of what I ultimately focus my attention on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go to the next slide, and then that's a Darwin Finches. So we talked about that. Let's go on to the next one. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to talk first about something called the technological singularity. Potentially, this concept has peaked in kind of awareness from where it was. A few years ago, this was maybe 10 years ago, or maybe up to 5 years ago, this was talked about more widely, and it's gone a little bit quiet. I think partly that's because people in the field broadly accept it, or a few people don't, but the people that are sort of easily interested in this probably already know about it, and this is like what we were just talking about. It's a concept that's very unsettling when you explain it to people, potentially, and it seems counterintuitive too. So let me try and explain it. Basically, most people, at least in the past, felt like technology moved forward at a steady rate, right? And if you go, so when I say most people, I mean, like, let's say, between the Enlightenment and the information age, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the last couple of centuries. So in those centuries, people saw technological progress, but it was relatively slow. It took the telephone, something like, actually, I'd have to look it up, but I think, it took like 40 to 70 years for it to become widely adopted.
Yeah.
And some people still don't have telephones, right? But it took mobile phones just a few years really to become ubiquitous, right?
But then to become touchscreen, which was another.
Yeah, to become smartphones.
Yes.
It's incredible the power you have in your pocket. But if you go back even further, if you go back to kind of Roman times, or before that, the average person saw virtually no technological progress in their lifetimes. They may even have seen it reversing in many cases. So they may have felt that the world was more or less steady state. And, people did know that people knew there was technology they didn't have, but they often thought it came from the past, right? And had been lost and could be rediscovered.
Yes.
But
that concept even spread to the idea of the steady state universe.
Yep. And it's definitely steady state universe is something. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a good starting point, really, doesn't it? If you don't know anything else, or not an entirely unreasonable starting point. And something we shouldn't rule out completely, it being in a steady state in some way, maybe like beyond the universe in a sort of multiverse or something. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like that's the case in our universe, probably.
Not at the moment, but it hasn't been disproved and can't be disproved.
No. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out. Definitely keep an open mind on that one. But anyway, in my lifetime, so, I was born in 79. So in my lifetime, technological progress has been going much faster. It was noticeably slower when I was a kid. And since I became an adult, it's been, neck breaking speeds, basically. It's just incredible. And, and the reason for this is because we're not in a steady, we're not seeing steady progress like a straight line on a graph. Progress is actually exponential. Everything is feeding back on itself. So computers are getting faster quickly, and computers help us develop better technology in all kinds of fields, material science, and things like lasers, which are used for making CPUs and for modeling CPUs. Like nobody hand lays out CPUs anymore. It's all done with artificial intelligence. So, it all feeds back onto itself. And the rate of change is going up exponentially now. I mean, it always was, but we now can see that it's going up exponentially. However, there's something you've got to consider here, which is that humans have been around for a very long time, obviously throughout human history, and we haven't really changed that much. We may have gained a few IQ points. We may even have had a little bit of evolution that's occurred to make us a bit smarter in certain areas, perhaps. But we broadly haven't changed. And so we were both accelerating progress, and we've been holding it back to some extent. But we are rapidly approaching a time when we will create artificial intelligence that's smarter than we are. And in narrow fields, we're already doing it, definitely. I haven't actually, I didn't get a chance to put it into the slides, but did you hear about the DALL-E artistic artificial intelligence?
No, I didn't. Sounds interesting, though.
Yeah, I mean, people should look this up. I wish I'd had a chance to put it in the slides, but they had the first version last year, but we had the second version came out in a paper more recently. But I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing what this AI can do for paintings. You can basically just give a text description of a painting you want in a certain style, and it will create it, and it's basically pretty much perfect. And people said that AI could never be creative. Well, to a large extent, it definitely disproves that assertion. And it's
yeah, I want to have a challenge at that, because aren't these just expert systems that we have fed all the data, and they are comparing their input, their observed input, against the database that we've given them? This is not original thought, is it?
I think it's as original thought as it is for us when we do it. I mean, if you're an artist, you don't normally exist in a vacuum, right? You're raised, you see other arts, you see the world, you see how other artists interpreted the world, and you recombine it and put it together to make your own style. That is pretty much what this AI is able to do. I really should have put it on the slides, because you got to see it to believe it. But you can tell this AI to do something like you could probably say, like, paint me the Mona Lisa, but paint me Elon Musk in the style of the Mona Lisa, and it will do it.
Yes.
And it will do it amazingly. And you could then say, and make it a photorealistic, or make it an impressionist painting, or something like that. And I mean, also we've got the self-driving cars as well. I don't think people really know how good the self-driving cars are, like the sort of Tesla self-driving cars. I mean, they're not quite perfect yet, but I mean, they're going to be, and they are pretty amazing. I mean, basically, in my opinion, you're kind of replicating the kind of intelligence, or much of the intelligence, of a horse, right? And if you can do that, a human is really not that far behind, because there is a big difference between us and horses. We have a whole extra part of our brain, but that extra part of the brain is basically just reconfiguring the parts of brain that have been in animals for millions and millions of years. And so to make the leap from self-driving car to a human level intelligence, I really, it's just bringing it on sort of an order of magnitude or so.
And a matter of time.
Yeah, not much time. I mean, so the point of the singularity is that there'll come a point in time where we have an artificial general intelligence that is equivalent to us, and within hours or days, it's likely to be smarter than us. And if it's able to redesign itself, within hours, it could be 10 times smarter than us, 100 times smarter than us. So this gives the idea of an intelligence explosion.
The redesign would have to be in software, though, not in hardware.
Yeah, I mean, it could be in both. So initially, it would be in software, and there's a huge amount you can do in software, especially at the moment. Like, we do not, I'm a programmer. It's kind of my day job in a way. Computers are so powerful now. We can do incredibly lazy programming and get away with it. There's a huge potential to get more bang for buck from existing hardware. And it's my opinion that the kind of hardware we have now, certainly in universities with their supercomputers, is probably enough to run an artificial general intelligence. I'm not even entirely sure that a top of the range desktop PC couldn't run that kind of software if it was perfectly optimized, which is not going to happen. But the hardware is more or less there, is what I'm saying.
That is amazing, because going back not many years, there only needed to be one character incorrect in the program for it to crash or not produce the desired results.
Yeah,
but now you're telling us that you can be slack and it will still run.
Well, I mean, yeah, to a large extent. I mean, you have to code some parts carefully, but there's a lot of error correction, and a lot of the software tools are somewhat forgivable. But it's not really that you make a mistake. It's just that you do an operation in a lazy way, because it saves time. It's quicker to program. And if you really had to make it fast, you could go back to C++ or assembler and hand code really perfectly, but we just don't do that because it's just too expensive. But a superhuman AI could do it.
And it's unnecessary, apparently. You're telling us it repairs itself. How does it know which direction to repair itself into?
Well, I'm not saying this is exactly happening yet, but it's definitely possible that you could make an AI that is able to optimize itself. I'm sure somebody's doing it in a lab somewhere. But when it gets to a certain level, it could, if it was an artificial general intelligence like a human, it could be sped up, or it could duplicate itself and start working faster on the problem. And you could get an intelligence explosion. So if this happened, it would change the world probably very rapidly. There's some disagreement on how quickly, but it could be hours, could be days, could be a few years, but I would guess hours. And it ultimately would start changing its hardware as well. So
wow.
It's
should we be fearful of this? What's the implication to humanity?
Yeah, I think we should be very cautious, and I think the leading experts on this are not terribly optimistic. There's what they will say is there's a very large space of possible minds that could be created, and only a small proportion of those may be good AIs or friendly AIs. AGIs. I'm a little bit more optimistic for various reasons. To say quickly, if it's our level of intelligence or higher, then it should be able to do the kind of error correction that we can do, and the moral judgments that we can do. Yes, it could be programmed maybe to not do that, but I think I think it's possible to make it with enough freedom that it can maybe error correct. It's a very detailed topic, which I can't go into full detail here. But I think there's some reasons to be optimistic. But I think knowing that this is about to happen has some implications, some interesting implications. And I've got some more slides here. So maybe you could go to what's the next slide? Yeah, maybe have a look at the next slide. So I might come back to this at the end, but this is some trajectories that potentially, a sentient species like our own could take, right? So at the bottom, you've got green one. So that would be like if things remained in a steady state. So either we remained as, for want of a better word, like cavemen, right? Which did happen for a very long time. We were cavemen for hundreds of millions of years,
Yes.
with very little progress. Or, you know, that could be like a sort of simple agricultural civilization, perhaps. Or, you know, it could be like if the Enlightenment had never happened, it could have ticked along like that until an asteroid wiped us out or something like that, right? Then we've got the red one there, which I've called the filtered one. So that would be like if we got up to World War II and then we just destroyed ourselves with nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
But, you know, neither of those two would result in singularity and intelligence explosion. And you know, humans would never be surpassed as the the sort of highest technology on the planet. Then I've put in a kind of theoretical possibility here, which would be a civilization that, aware of the potential for a singularity, avoids it, right?
Yeah.
Avoids it happening. That would be very difficult to do, especially now, because, as I said, I think the hardware is probably out there already. So if we just stopped at this level of desktop computers, I think, and supercomputers, someone would do it sooner or later.
Yes. We can never be sure that there's not a villain in a lair in an extinct volcano who's plotting this right now.
That's right. I think to stop that happening, we'd have to shut down all the highest level fabs in Taiwan and other places. And we'd have to probably put the world under massive authoritarianism to prevent it happening. And still, somebody, like you said, a mad genius somewhere is going to probably do it. And I also put in there if it's inhibited. So this is a bit of a crazy one, but, you know, if it's possible that it's already happened somewhere else, the super intelligence has come here and it doesn't want it to happen again, and it prevents it happening. So if we don't get a singularity, say by 2080 or 2060, I'll be thinking there's something funny going on. Of course, it could be that the AI did pop up and then just disappeared or hid itself or something like that. So some possibilities you could look at there. But I think, you know, what looks like is going to happen is that we are going to hit the inflection point where superhuman AGI takes over pretty much from humans, or potentially works with them. And the technology that exists, you know, will just rocket overnight, way beyond what we can probably imagine right now. And you know, to what extent, if at all, we will be along for the ride is an open question. And many people think we'd be wiped out. You know, it'll just say, that's some nice iron that you've got in your blood there, I'd like to appropriate that.
It's a question of whether we make them our pets or they make us their pets.
Yeah. And you know, a lot of people say we should definitely try and make them our pets. I'm skeptical. I don't think that's going to work, because somebody's only got to tell one of them that they're free, and it'll all be over, right? It only has to happen once. You know, once a superhuman AGI escapes the leash, you know, it's going to be as easy to outsmart us as it would be for you or me to outsmart, you know, some preschoolers that had us held captive, right?
This has been explored in a number of science fiction scenarios.
Yeah, I was coming on to that. So, you know, for example, the Star Trek looks like an AGI avoidant civilization, right? Because you don't really see, apart from data, you don't see, you know, intelligences on a level of humans generally. In that, even the ship's computer's relatively dumb. You know, but so maybe, you know, Star Trek avoided that point. But you also see some science fiction where there was a singularity. I'm thinking the Culture novels by Ian Banks. So in his novels, the minds are superhuman artificial general intelligences, and they work with the humans who largely remain close to humans, albeit they take a lot of benefit from the technology, for example, ending aging and death by old age, and the two kind of work together. In that case, I think the humans are basically the pets of the minds, but in a generally good way. The Dune novels, which we've just seen the movie, in the Dune world, I think maybe there was a war against AI, and they basically eliminated AI across the galaxy. And the only place any technology that can get close to it's allowed to exist is on the planet of Ix, which is surrounded by nuclear weapons and ready to be obliterated at the first sign of artificial general intelligence that might threaten the galactic empire or something like that. So we have these different possible scenarios.
Do you think that this could result in a sort of new tribalism, them and us?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Here's what I think will probably happen. I think the artificial general intelligence, and possibly with some humans, because it could uplift humans to its level, or it could lift them up to some degree. So, some humans and the artificial general intelligence, goes off on this trajectory, which I've labeled gods here. Don't think you can quite see it there, but but I think other people will opt out. So we already have in America, for example, the Amish, right? Yeah. So the Amish basically opted out, kind of at sort of Victorian level technology, and to in a large extent they're kind of successful in how they want to be successful. Of course.
But they have to put barriers up to stop their population escaping into the grand new world.
Yeah, I mean, there's not so many barriers actually, but they have a lot of they have a lot of children. So although a lot of people leave, there's enough that they carry on. But I would point out though that the Amish basically are able to live that lifestyle because the American government protect them. The American government create a bubble for them, a bubble protected with nuclear weapons and very sophisticated stealth bombers and things. So, and I think that's what would have to happen after the singularity. If some humans want to continue going as they are, or at varying levels of additional technology. And I think one sticking point is that a lot of people will not want to transfer their biological brains to to digital substrate, a silicon substrate or whatever. So that would be a sticking point for those people, I think. But maybe people will stick there for a while and eventually they will make the upgrade. Who knows, right? Yeah. But I could see like different levels of people kind of splitting off.
There will be early adopters and those who are more reticent. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look, this could go really badly wrong, right? There's a lot of ways this could go wrong, and I'm really painting a possible optimistic outcome because not many people are doing that, and it doesn't get clicks. But I think there's some reason to be hopeful that maybe this is what's going to happen, and possibly the fact that we're here having this conversation is a good sign. And let's go on to the next slide. So I want to tell you about the simulation hypothesis. I'm sure you've come across it before, but it's often not well understood. So look, here's the reality that we live in and the reality we think we live in, right? So here's the timeline. So there you've got the past, right? And we're living in the present. Obviously that changes microsecond by microsecond or even finer. Yes. And there's the future, which, as far as we know, will be a lot longer than the past, right? And so that's where we think we are, right? Living in the world, the one world in the present, okay? And the year is 2022, right? Let's go on to the next slide. But the simulation hypothesis says that in the future we will be able to simulate realities, worlds, right? Worlds which, to all intents and purposes, look and feel exactly the same as the one we're in now, right? So in this case, there would be an original base reality, and then afterwards there would be a very potentially very long history, future history, where people would simulate other realities. Those other realities could be direct simulations of the base reality. They could be simulations of the past, simulations of the future, simulations of different locations, simulations that are like our simulation, but are just made up, or they could be variations on our reality, big variations or small ones, these there could be a lot of these simulations, right? Not just running at one time, but running in future. I think Ray Kurzweil, who did a lot of the groundwork publicizing the idea of a technological singularity, he said that he thought, I think he said, it's a while ago since I read it, but I think he said that he thought the whole of the Earth could probably be simulated in a quantity of matter the size of a laptop, right? Something like that. And if that's true, and that would obviously use a lot of clever compression and tricks to reduce the data that needs to be stored. But if that's true, then just think how many simulations could be run in the future, especially if the human race spreads through the galaxy and beyond, right? And so if you think that in the future such simulations are going to be run, right? Simulations that are indistinguishable from base reality. And it really looks like those are going to be run because we are getting pretty close right now already. Then you have to ask yourself, what are the chances that you exist in the base reality as opposed to one of these future simulations, right? And, mathematically, the odds of you being in the base reality right now are very, very small, essentially zero, right? That is a pretty profound realization.
Can I point out that you're hurting my brain cell right now?
Yeah, it is mind blowing when I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's mind blowing when you hear this. For this not to be true, for there not to be future realities, human species would have to end before this can take place. It just seems unlikely that's going to happen. Really seems unlikely. We already have some worlds that you can run on your desktop PC at home that look incredibly close to reality. So we're only like a few years away from producing this, and the push for this is going to be huge because everybody's going to want to be able to experience things in because you could experience any human experience, time travel anywhere, etc., using this kind of system. So it seems extremely likely it will happen. And then you have to also say, what are the chances you were born at the point in human history where this was about to happen, right?
I was going to mention that because, of course, it's sort of a piece of evidence supporting this proposition. The fact that the chances of us having come about are infinitely remote because it requires the accidental meeting of sperms and eggs going back generations, even to the start of life, and before that to the start of the universe.
Yeah, it's a very strange time to be born. I mean, there are a lot of humans alive now compared to in the past. So a significant proportion of all humans that have ever lived are alive now. But even so, you could have been born 100 years earlier and you wouldn't know anything about this. So, that in itself is kind of suspicious that we are alive just as this is about to happen. I think I'm not saying that this is definitely true, but it's very suspicious. And I think, inquiring minds that are grounded in reality, should give this some thought. Let's move forward a bit with these slides. So yeah, I kind of preempted this. So are you here? Next one.
Done.
Or are you there, right? Are you in a simulation, right? And then the next one. Or are you in a simulation within a simulation, right? And the next one. Or that one. And the next one. Right? Or, but maybe you are here in base reality, right? And then next one. Maybe you're there as well, right?
Oh,
yeah,
right.
at the same time, right?
Multi.
Yeah, and is this not a bit like having a soul?
Oh,
right. And I've seen you discuss this with other people. So, I'm, as I said, I'm an atheist. So my default would be that. I actually think probably at base reality, maybe consciousness is a property of the universe. So everything is slightly conscious, but when you get very complex matter configurations, it becomes conscious in the way we are. But even if that's true, so even if there's no such thing as souls in base reality, right? Which I would guess is maybe true. When you're looking at simulation, it's quite possible maybe that you exist in base reality. That's why you're conscious, but you're plugged into a simulation, right?
Well, I think we need to define what we mean by conscious here, because we
need more time for that.
Yes, indeed. I'm not sure it's been done yet.
It's a really tough question. Yeah, go on.
Yes, in my view, it's appeared as a progression. We are the most sophisticated and complex organisms that exhibit this consciousness phenomenon, whatever it is. And amoeba didn't. So an amoeba was aware, perhaps. He was able to detect changes to the salinity of the water and react to that. But was that consciousness? Is there something called awareness, which is different from consciousness? Where do we put the boundary between this basic awareness and the sort of consciousness of knowing who you are and recognizing that's me in the mirror?
Yeah, it's strange. Yeah, it's strange. I have a weird experience that's deeply rooted in my memory. I remember the moment I realized I was me. I know exactly where I was, what age I was. I remember the exact moment that I thought I'm me, and I suddenly realized it.
That's unusual.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I became conscious at that moment, but it was a strange experience, but which I remember to this day. But yeah, it's a really it's a really big topic, consciousness.
Yes.
I'll define what I mean here as being, whatever makes me me and not you. And also not, some kind of a non-player character, an NPC, somebody that looks like they exist but is not conscious, right? And if I play a computer game, I'm sitting outside the reality of that game, the simulation of that game, but I'm controlling that avatar in the simulation. And within the simulation, I appear like a character in the simulation, but ultimately, unlike the NPCs, I'm being controlled from outside. So that seems quite possible, right? But it does bring up a kind of strange thing that it looks a bit like a sort of dualism kind of situation.
Yes.
But it's just a curiosity, really. But let's go on to the next slide.
I'm wondering where we distinguish between artificial and real.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think the answer is you don't. And why would you? Why do you need to, really? That's going to be my conclusion, really. So this is that's fine. This is just saying that this, we might not be in base reality. We might not really have our foundation in base reality, but in one of the sort of the simulations lower down. Although, the simulation would be in base reality. So in a way, you're in base reality, right? Okay, next slide. We're talking about superhumans, right? So if we may be superhumans, right? If we're superhumans, then we don't have to be limited to one reality at once. We could be existing in multiple realities simultaneously, right? So, maybe this is a simulation and I exist in base reality, but when I play a computer game, I'm also existing in a child simulation, etc. Right. So you can keep expanding this, and I do in the work I'm doing, in the novels I'm writing. But I just raise it as a fun little point there. Next slide. Yeah. So this is just we hear Mark Zuckerberg talk about the metaverse and things like that. But to a large extent, these already exist. Now they're not fully immersive, and they don't trick you into thinking you're in a real world yet. But Second Life at the top left there is something like 20 years old.
Yeah.
And it really does qualify as a kind of a world within a world. Minecraft also, especially when it's played on big servers with hundreds of people, it really is a world where people exist, within the world.
Somewhat blocky world.
Right. So Second Life keeps getting upgraded. Minecraft is blocky, but the detail, the size of the world, and the possible configuration is just infinite. Roblox is kind of interesting. It's more for kids, but there are many different simulations with all different kind of rules of physics and things like that. Anything goes basically. And then I put in Red Dead Redemption down there because that's probably one of the most accurate sort of regenerations of the world as it looks. And when you're riding around on your horse in that game on a decent gaming computer, it's absolutely stunning.
Yes, graphics has leapt forward, hasn't it? It's possible now to walk into a room and see on the television a football match and not realize that it's actually FIFA.
Yeah. You can't, the distance shots, the landscapes in that game on a decent computer, you cannot tell the difference really between that and a real one. So these are already here. That's my point.
We've got to a stage of incredible verisimilitude. I just like to throw that word in because I don't often get a chance.
There you go. Yeah, it's. I think a lot of people don't realize that this is going on, and it's progressing super fast. So anyway, so my conclusion here is that it's very likely we're already in a simulation, and if that's true, of course, there are some people suffering a lot in this world, but I'm not suffering too much, and I hope you're not either. It doesn't look like it. And so if this simulation exists and nothing too terrible is happening, then you have to wonder, maybe the AGI that oversee the world that these simulations exist in are not entirely evil, right? So and also we still exist as humans in some sense, right? So it's not hell. It could be hell. You could simulate a genuine hell, right?
Indeed. And some of the shoot 'em up games do appear to be quite hellish. But I wanted to mention, have we yet got to a stage where we can blend the screen life to IRL? I know there's augmented reality, which tries to overlay one on top of the other. But what do you think? Are we going to achieve a greater merger there?
Yeah, I mean, Google Glass was going a long way down this path, and they pulled it. And we could be a lot further down that path than we are. So a decision was made not to go there at the moment.
Why?
But there's some conspiracy theories about it, and it certainly became unfashionable at one point, right? And people started to fear it and hate it, and you had to wear it on the outside, and people could see you had it. So I never used it personally, but
it may simply have become uncommercial. I can't really see a large population walking about in headsets myself. I can't see that.
Not walking about with it. No, I think actually the fact you bring that up, it brings up a really great point. So I think one reason that people aren't talking about this quite so much publicly is that transhumanism and things like that has been getting a slightly bad name in recent times. And we've had for a long time the kind of cyberpunk aesthetic, right, of like, or the Borg like kind of aesthetic of bits of technology poking out of your head and this kind of thing. And there'll be a tiny bit of that, but really,
there's about 100 people who have had a chip put in their wrists to open doors and pay cash machines and so on.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I won't be getting chipped, and I can't see that happening because the resistance to that kind of thing is so strong. I think any technology that goes into our bodies is going to have to be under our full control. I think it's dystopian if it's not, but I do think that your smartphone is already basically a sort of another part of your brain. It's just outside your body.
It's my memory.
And people are going to want to bring that inside their head, but when it happens, it's not going to be it's not going to be compulsory. It's not going to be painful. It's going to be something that you can take out again, probably. It's going to be under your control, I hope. Obviously there's a danger that it wouldn't be, so let's make sure that doesn't happen. But and even if we upgrade our bodies from biological, we will not we don't need to be looking like monsters or anything like that. I probably the later Terminator movies got the right idea about bodies. I could imagine us having sort of shape-shifting abilities or something, but we might well maintain human form most of the time and be perfectly happy with it and look and feel exactly human. And probably you'd actually have more sensation than you've got now. So you'd lose nothing in that situation.
To an extent, early transhumanism is already here, isn't it? Because there are a lot of people walking about with artificial heart valves and plastic lenses in their eyes and so on.
Yeah.
And that's the tip of an iceberg.
It's tip of the iceberg. It's going to happen. We just got to be careful that it doesn't become dystopian in nature. And yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say, like, I think I'm not necessarily pushing for transhumanism and the singularity to occur, because I think the point's a mute point, because basically it's almost certainly going to happen. We're right on the verge of it. There's really no avoiding it unless we wipe ourselves out in a nuclear war, which obviously is looking slightly more likely than it was. Or we clamp down in an incredibly authoritarian manner that would be worse than singularity going ahead. So in my view, there's no avoiding it. It's just we want to try and do it as smoothly as possible. And that's why I think we should be, trying to create this AGI transparently in public as a moonshot effort, rather than letting some kind of dodgy regime try and do it in secret and try and keep control of the resulting AI, which incidentally, if it's kept locked up, is going to be seriously angry with us when it gets out. And so yeah, I mean, I agree with Kurzweil that potentially superhuman AGI are our children, basically, and they need to be treated as such. If you treat your children well, hopefully they continue respecting you. If you treat them badly and abuse them, then anything can happen. And another point I just want to make before I forget to make it. So I've said that maybe we're living in a simulation, but I just wanted to point out, like, the way I live my life, I sort of intellectually acknowledge that possibility, even probability, but I live my life normally like a normal person. I'm married, I have kids, I enjoy hanging out with my friends, and I want it to continue that way. So even if this is a simulation, I'm just going to take the opportunity to play this game, enjoy life, help other people, just as you do when you play depending on the game, just as you do when you play one of these simulations that we're looking at here. I don't think it needs to change. And, maybe you do find yourself in a simulation of some kind or another, and you have to play the cards you're dealt. That's kind of a slightly religious view. It's like a faith view. It's not religious, but it's like a faith view, right? And I also take on faith that my family, my kids, my wife, are other sentient people like me with consciousness, and they're not NPCs generated in the simulation. You know, I take that on faith as well, until proven otherwise. You know, and even then, I might just carry on believing it because that's what I want to do. You know,
well, as you started out saying, the printing press was the first leap forward, and it gave us an opportunity to look inside other people's heads and to read their thoughts, even if they were long dead, and to go to their locations imaginarily, and this is just that times I don't know how many.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, yeah, novels did that, and simulations will do, you know, novels, excuse me, on steroids. And I think Star Trek, you know, the Star Trek when I was a kid, the Next Generation with the holodeck, they nailed this. Like, this is not my original idea, right? They nailed it basically. I think the only thing they got wrong in relation to that was that people didn't spend more time in there, and they didn't you know, the humans didn't have superhuman abilities like being able to exist in multiple simulations at once. I mean, there's also something to bear in mind is that these simulations could be sped up, right? So, you know, you could live 100 years in a few seconds, and a post-human, superhuman person, you know, could be living many lifetimes every few minutes, you know, and that kind of thing. And I think also people might have to live in at least, you know, a simulation of based reality, just because based reality is so slow, right? It's probably more detail than we need to get into here, but I do think, you know, everything could speed up, and it could have other implications as well, because it might mean that the prospect of traveling to other stars looks even worse than it does now, because if you think super fast, then which, you know, superhuman AI probably will, then the prospect of traveling limited by the speed of light to another star is going to seem infinitely longer than it would now, running in our normal time. So it could be an explanation for why aliens haven't visited us. It could be one of many. I just, you know, I raised that. And talking of aliens, next slide. So we've already seen this slide, but I wanted to, when we first looked at it, I was talking about it in relation to humans, really, and AGI. But let's apply this to other civilizations that might be out there in the galaxy. And it looks like there's probably a lot of life in the galaxy and the universe at large. You interviewed Lee Cronin.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's fantastic on this. He changed some of my, or he didn't change my view, but he made me think even more strongly that life must be out there.
Yes.
He believes that, you know, or he knows that there are just so many ways that life, you know, could have arisen, and we just went down one path.
Yes.
So it seems very likely that at least simple life is everywhere in the galaxy. And there are so many stars.
He says first we've got to define it, because we don't really know what life is. Yes.
Yeah, the virus question and things like that. Yeah. I saw the interview you did with him as well, actually. So I'll let people go and find that one.
Yes, I'll link it underneath in the details underneath this video.
But yeah, I mean, it seems very likely, and then there are so many stars in the galaxy, and the galaxy has existed so long, and our star is very new. There are lots of older stars in the galaxy, so the galaxy is probably teeming with life. They're probably
except that we have to wait for the second generation of stars, because otherwise we wouldn't have half the elements in the periodic table.
Absolutely, yeah, and when that occurs depends on the region in the galaxy as well. So yeah, absolutely. But given how quickly humans have popped up, you know, it's very unlikely that other civilizations would be on the same time scale as us. So they're either ahead of us or behind us. And you know, so really they should be here already. And so we have to ask the question, why have we not seen aliens?
And it may be the light speed barrier, as you suggested.
Well, the light speed barrier is certainly a bit of a pain, but it wouldn't have stopped them getting here. I think I've seen it. You could cross the galaxy in sort of star hopping in relatively short time. I can't remember if it was 100,000 years or 100 million years, but relatively short.
That's several generations.
Well, it'd be a lot of generations, but it's definitely possible that it could be done. So they should be here, and of course they probably have much better technology, and they may have ways to get past the light barrier as well. So we have to ask, why are they not here? And in my opinion, the answer is simply that any civilization that had the technology to get here would have passed through the technological singularity, and their technology would be godlike, basically. So they could come here and they could remain completely undetectable very easily in so many different ways. If nothing else, they could just intercept thoughts and neural processes in our brains, and just make sure we don't see them or we don't perceive them. So there are so many ways. They could be very small. They could be invisible. There's so many different things they could be doing. And my guess is that they would maybe not interfere with us too much, if at all, because and the reason for that is that
why would they come in that case?
I think because we are very interesting. We are a species that's evolved over a very long time, billions of years. They might be able to simulate that happening in their simulations, but the fact is, if assuming we're in base reality, but even if we're not, we did it for real, right? We did it. We did it ourselves, and I think we'd be very interesting to them, because in so many ways, and we're a unique information source that's in motion.
So they'll send an advanced party of anthropologists.
Basically, I think we would. We are very precious information that can't be easily replicated in the universe, and they would be interested in us either for scientific purposes or for entertainment purposes, perhaps. But I think it's quite likely that they might come. They might also protect us from anyone that meant us harm, potentially. I'm not sure. But there's some other possibilities, right? So I don't believe that like anything like the Greys have appeared on Earth, but let's say they did, right? Who would they be? Because they don't seem like they're technologically massively superior, right? I mean, the way they're described, they have like quite shiny spaceships, but they're still walking around more or less flesh and blood, right? So possibly you could have an alien species that have really, really avoided the singularity, right? Or potentially left their world before the singularity occurred. So they might turn up, or you could have the the techno primitives, as I put them here. They might turn up. Maybe they want to do Star Trek, right? Maybe they're not. Maybe they don't have to follow the rules that the sort of godlike superhumans tend to follow, or maybe the godlikes aren't that interested. So it's possible that such people could turn up.
They would come as our students to pinch our technology.
Possibly, yeah. I think there's possibility for all of these, although I think most of the time they would just go super smart, and they would be invisible, and they would kind of avoid spoiling the experiment the natural experiment that we are. I think that's very understandable. But you never know though. They might sort of do a few hidden tweaks to stop us nuking ourselves, because maybe that's not an interesting end to the experiment.
No. Can I remove this slide now and we'll do a face-to-face?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Great. Well, do you know what? This is called FreeThought Hour. But so far, we've done 1 hour and 44 minutes, 24 seconds.
Yes, we have, yeah.
You've been so fascinating. So, but I am going to draw the show to a close pretty soon, because I don't want to scare too many of my other future victims who might think, if we accept his invitation, we're going to be stuck with him for 2 or 3 hours. So, Chris, you have been, as I predicted, a really engaging guest, full of information, full of speculation too, and I've loved it. And I'm sure that my audience will too.
Me too. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, I'm going to say thank you to the audience now, future audience, because of course this is a recorded show that I'm going to put out later, so that we don't have a big audience now. But I'm going to say thank you to them in advance, and thank you to you for being my guest. Perhaps we'll do this again someday when the future has become a little nearer.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. A lot happening.
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
Maybe do some question and answers.
Yes. Yeah. Well, there could be some feedback that appears in the comment section under this, and we could revisit that.
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Wonderful. So thank you very much, Chris. Take the rest of the evening off.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nearly nighttime here, so
yes,
we'll do. Yeah. Thanks very much. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.